Looks like I have a few more people to admit. Chris, how are you feeling? Do you think we should get started soon?
Yeah, I think we've got quite a few people here, so we could get started, I think, whenever you're ready.
Okay. Well, everyone, my name is Erin Engman. I'm the senior planner here at the City of Tualatin, and I'm joined tonight by Chris Green with HHPR and Steve Coper, also with the City of Tualatin. We are the ones managing this project, and again, thank you all for attending tonight. Just some housekeeping things. If you have questions along the way, feel free to add them to the chat. And then the hosts and co-hosts will be reading those as the presentation goes along, and we hope to address most of your questions at the end or follow up with you via email if that's your preference. And I don't know if Chris or Steve has anything else to add about housekeeping. For the most part, this presentation tonight is mainly informational. We'll have a few kind of like fun polls and then open it up for some questions or temperature checks along the way. And with that, I'll hand it over to Chris. Thanks, everyone.
All right, thank you. My name is Chris Green. I'm a planner with Harper Hoff Peterson Regelis, and we're working with City of Tualatin on a project to look at the manufacturing park or MP zone in Tualatin, specifically in the Basalt Creek area, and what updates might help that zone better implement the planning that's taken place over the last decade. So you'll see in a few of my slides some of the plans that have been done over many years recently, and we want to definitely take those into account and have a code that can implement them. So tonight we'd like to just share a little bit of information about the project, get feedback from folks on direction, and yeah, learn more and help kind of set the course. So first question, and in terms of the live polling questions, we were thinking if folks want to answer in the chat or queue. Oh, never mind, we've got an actual poll up. So yeah, just who's here, give us an idea in terms of our audience and who we're reaching and any interest in the project.
So I might give it another minute just to see if anybody else wants to participate.
Yeah, I don't know if we count as out of the 9 the hosts or not. I can't remember. So
Okay,
but it looks like we've got pretty good participation there.
So now I'm going to go and share our poll results with everyone. Looks like we have a good mix.
Yeah. Okay, so now that we've kind of sensed the audience, I wanted to say we'll talk about the project background and purpose a little bit more. What we've learned so far, we've had part of our consulting team, Leland Consulting Group, has done some market analysis on the industrial market in the southwest portion of the metro area and Tualatin specifically. So some of those results, some of what we've found in looking at other industrial zones in Tualatin and other cities. Then we'll actually talk about possible directions that could be looked at for the industrial zone, the MP zone, as a finished product of this process and what some of the next steps might be. So in terms of the planning that's gone on, we're focusing this on the MP or manufacturing park zone that's within the Basalt Creek area. There is some other MP zoned areas in Tualatin in the kind of Leviton area. But this is really focused on implementing these Basalt Creek plans. So you can see outlined in orange there is the project area. And so adjacent to Basalt Creek Parkway, City of Wilsonville just there to the south. Graham's Ferry Road goes through this area. So very south end of Tualatin. One of the initial plans was the Basalt Creek concept plan. So that was a big effort between City of Tualatin, City of Wilsonville, and a lot of members of the community participating in that process and determine what the future of the area more generally was going to be, what types of land uses would be there. So that blue area within City of Tualatin, that's manufacturing park, that was designated through that process. And so that's kind of what we're trying to fine tune to implement that plan. But another important plan that's also recently been adopted, Southwest and Basalt Creek Development Area Plan. So this is a tax increment finance plan that can provide revenue for infrastructure in this area. We'll talk a little bit later on about infrastructure as a constraint in this area. But this plan basically provides that basis for some infrastructure financing, but it's dependent on development taking place in the area in order to have those funds become available. So it's sort of a chicken and egg situation, but with that development comes the opportunity to build infrastructure that can support this area. So we've got another polling question coming up. I went through pretty quickly with some of those previous plans. Wanted to see how familiar everyone was with those coming in. All right, I think we almost have everyone. It looks like it's pretty knowledgeable group as far as these planning processes. So I wanted to give a quick overview of what those were, but it sounds like there's a lot of familiarity out there with those. Maybe some folks that participated in those processes over the years. So we want to definitely be consistent with those plans and kind of take that next step towards implementation. So some of the priorities from those plans, high employment density, funding for infrastructure improvements, and minimizing conflict between uses. So this is an area that's designated by Metro as a regionally significant employment area. So definitely well served by infrastructure and a good place for industrial and other high employment type uses. And so it has some protections that go with that. And those were definitely priorities in the plan as well, to have these a lot of jobs in this area to help support the community, and high wage jobs, and really taking advantage of that location and infrastructure. Funding for infrastructure improvements, as I mentioned, with the urban renewal area or the Southwest Basalt Creek plan, taking that next layer of actually bringing, water, sewer, streets, things like that from sort of the underlying features that are there, like I-5, and really kind of bringing it closer to the actual property to be developed. And then minimizing conflict between uses. It is a plan that really kind of emphasized that industrial and employment, but about half of the land in the Tualatin portion of Basalt Creek is not designated to be industrial. A lot of it's going to be residential and some commercial. And so looking at the best way to make that compatible, because there will be residential areas that are in really close proximity to these manufacturing park, or whatever the next version of that manufacturing park zone is. Here's how the zone currently stands. So it's been around for quite a while. It's intended for these campus type industrial uses. There's an emphasis on manufacturing and research. There are some light industrial uses that are allowed, but it is a list of the types of uses that are allowed in that zone. So that does tend to be kind of a short list in terms of what's allowed. That park and kind of campus type feeling of these is sort of reinforced by, there's a landscaping and setback requirements that are pretty extensive. There's a 60-foot setback from streets in a lot of areas. And so the giant lawns that would be kind of a form of the zone aren't necessarily by accident. That's in the current code. The Tualatin Code also has a whole section on environmental impacts from industrial uses and limiting those. So things like noise, vibration, glare, those kinds of impacts that you'd normally associate with those. They're already limited by Chapter 63 of Tualatin's Development Code, which applies to all these industrial zones, including the MP. And then distribution and warehousing is not permitted in the zone, not as an accessory use to manufacturing, just it's not permitted in the zone. So that's kind of the current status of that zone, and it hasn't seen a lot of development activity. It's really geared towards these large parcels and kind of the big manufacturing campus that see in some places. So what we've learned so far on the project, Leland Consulting put together kind of an analysis of the current conditions in the industrial market and Southwest metropolitan sub-market, which includes Tualatin, Tigard, Wilsonville, Sherwood, and then Tualatin specifically. And what they found was that, probably not a surprise to many of you in the room or the virtual room here, industrial vacancy is very low, and the pricing per square foot more than doubling in the past decade. That was a little bit of a surprise to me. I'd known industrial demand has really heated up, but that's pretty staggering in terms of the increase in the price. Some of that's constrained land supply, so there's not a lot of these industrially zoned sites that have infrastructure and don't have constraints associated with them. And so that's even pushing some parcels that wouldn't normally have been seen as prime industrial type parcels to be developed, and some of the secondary markets listed there where people are going further out of the Portland metro area. And also a demand for industrial commercial flex space. So looking at buildings that can accommodate a lot of different employment and industrial type uses that can maybe switch between uses as they get different occupants in, and that can be used by multiple different tenants. So having a building that may have several different firms in there for developers, especially, this helps mitigate some of the risk of sort of marketing your building to a lot of different types of companies that are out there, commercial, office type users, industrial, things like that, rather than maybe one specific type of manufacturing. But also the scale, we'll talk about that a little bit. So in terms of that demand, there is definitely land available to meet that demand in the Basalt Creek area that's MP zoned. So again, taking kind of a close look at that area in the orange, you see it's primarily vacant land and does have that industrial zoning. So this is kind of the glass is half full slide, and then the glass is half empty slide. Looking at that also, as I mentioned, it's not currently served by a lot of high capacity infrastructure, whether that's streets, but especially water and sewer. One thing to really highlight in this area, and you can see with those red property lines, is these are smaller lot sizes in this area. There already has been some division of the land here, so it's not a 50-acre parcel in this area generally that you're going to see that there's like an industrial campus like we've seen in some parts of Tualatin or the metro area in general. There's a lot of smaller lots here. Topography can be an issue. There's some of these lands are sloping, and that can be a big deal for industrial development. You'll notice a diagonal kind of line going through there. That is transmission line corridor, so that can be a bit of a barrier, almost similar to topography, but not a natural feature. But then that limited range of permitted uses in the MP zone is something that more than any of those things, even more than infrastructure, probably is something that's within the control of this process to help remove at least one of those constraints and provide some more opportunities. It's a matter of doing that in a way that's consistent with those goals of the plan for high employment density, compatibility with the adjacent neighborhoods, and so forth. We did some comparison of different industrial zones. Part of Leland Consulting's work was interviewing stakeholders in the metro area and some of the stakeholders in the Basalt Creek area, and getting some ideas of what industrial zones were out there that were really kind of were similar, light industrial for the most part, but worked better than the MP zone currently does. So there's a variety of those from Sherwood, even general manufacturing in Tualatin was one of them that was mentioned. There's some communities doing more craft industrial, which gears itself towards the smaller operations and smaller parcels that may have a industrial retail component. Some of those have been in areas with kind of redevelopment more so than Basalt Creek, but there's some potentially useful examples there with the smaller lot sizes. So in this case, we have some live discussion questions, and in these you can enter answers into the chat. You can think about it and get back to us. We'll have some contact information later in the presentation. But I wanted to ask about other factors that might be barriers to development, and if there's other zones that stand out as potentially good comparisons, or what are some areas that have people feel work well as industrial districts. And we won't have like the countdown clock on this one, but if I see answers pop into the chat really quickly, we can talk about some of those, and otherwise we can kind of move forward. We'll also have time at the end to discuss. All right, I think I'm going to move to the next slide to keep us going here, but I'll kind of keep an eye on that chat window. So possible directions for this new zone. there's some areas where the plans that have been adopted for this area and those goals that are in the plans and the market demand that was identified really align pretty well. So those developments that have multiple tenant spaces that are smaller, rather than maybe just one large scale manufacturing campus with a single user, like it's sort of maybe originally intended in the MP zone. Flexible configuration, so places that have manufacturing, that craft manufacturing scale sometimes, a lot of those involve office space and then storing and distributing goods on site. Firm may be doing all of those things. They may like being located next to other places that provide a variety of those services as well. The flex spaces like this, they do have the potential to have a pretty high overall employment density, especially because you have several smaller operations. There is an office component sometimes to these, which tends to have high employment density. It's a good situation for business incubator type spaces, so it's easier to enter the market sometimes in these smaller spaces, and then more diversified economic base you have. This isn't just good for the developer or property owner, but it's good for the local economy as a whole. If you have lots of small firms in a space, and you don't have to rely on that one large firm to fill out all the industrial area. So allowing more types of industrial uses is one area that we're looking at. So there's that short list of basically products that can be manufactured in the zone. And to give some examples of how specific it is, it's things like electrical, optical, and musical instruments, textiles and sporting goods. The list is longer than that, but it's a list of what's allowed rather than what's not allowed. So it does tend to be pretty focused currently. And so allowing more uses makes that risk in developing those properties a little bit less. There's a wider variety of industries that can be involved. And in allowing more types of industrial uses, one factor to consider is, as mentioned earlier, is there are already codes in place that limit these impacts from industrial uses. And so to the extent that not allowing certain uses would prevent these impacts, that's already covered by another section of code. So that wouldn't necessarily go away. Encouraging different scales of development. So this is a pretty important one for Basalt Creek. So we saw those really smaller parcels. Some of the slides you see here are development in Tualatin that's in the MP zone already. And so the 50 to 60 foot setbacks, the landscaped areas, these really start to shrink a property if it's not already very large to begin with. There's really can diminish the developable portion of a property. And so looking at setbacks that may make a little more sense and other dimensional requirements that allow a little bit of a denser building type in the area and really make efficient use of that land in those parcels. So allowing some limited commercial uses. There already is allowances for some commercial use in the MP zone. It tends to be really geared towards the accessory to a manufacturing use, or really geared towards just serving those manufacturing uses. It is a regionally significant employment area, so it's not a place that's really meant to be like a major retail center or something like that, but making sure that there is opportunities there to serve both employees of these new businesses and also those surrounding neighborhoods. There's a real opportunity there to kind of blend industrial and commercial and increase that flexibility as well. One topic that's come up is shipping and distribution and warehousing. So as e-commerce continues to grow, there are a lot of manufacturing, industrial, and other employment type activities that have some distribution component to them. And so some of the zones we looked at in other cities allow distribution and warehousing in conjunction with a manufacturing use or something similar, so that it's allows that function in that space without having that be the dominant use. And then ensuring compatibility with residential areas. The zone will be near and sometimes adjacent to residential areas, like across the street. And so looking at, do things like the deeper setbacks and landscaping that the zone currently have, or reducing building height adjacent to a residential zone, do those maybe provide an important buffer, or are there other methods that we can look at where this zone is going to be next to residential areas? Because currently those larger setbacks and landscaped areas apply everywhere, but they could be pretty useful in terms of those edges of the district. So before we get to next steps, actually, I wanted to see if anybody had anything to talk about in the chat window in terms of directions. Is there other directions that you didn't see mentioned here? I went through them pretty quickly, but some ideas that we haven't looked at or aren't mentioned here, or thoughts on which of these might be the best places to emphasize changes to the zone. And again, we can circle back to this as well, but I wanted to leave a little bit of a pause here.
So I've seen some messages come in with, seems like maybe some site-specific questions, or kind of speaking to some of the challenges that people have seen in this area. And I don't know if we want to go through that right now, or if, just kind of pause and give space for some new considerations.
I think, yeah, let's maybe talk about some of those constraints people are mentioning.
Okay. So some of the things that I've heard are just maybe questions about future roads or utilities in the area. So as we've mentioned, this area isn't currently served by city utilities. And at this point, a lot of that infrastructure would be extended through development and would be developer driven. But feel free to reach out to me. I'll provide my contact information after this meeting too, if you want to get more detailed with your questions, and we can certainly have a sidebar conversation. Another challenge I see people mention is the PGE transmission corridor, topography, the water table in the area, that flooding and pooling of water might be an issue. Considerations for a future street grid. And I don't know if anybody would like to add another challenge that they see in our comments, and we can capture that for our meeting purposes and reach out to you later to discuss some of these challenges that you see.
Yeah, it looks like that PGE corridor is one I saw in the chat as well. That's yeah, those can be pretty difficult to work around. It's almost like sometimes it can be as limiting as a canyon or ravine or something, but just in a different form. Was there any ideas on some of those concepts and directions that the plan might be going? And we can always come back to that at the end as well. I'm going to talk about next steps. So we are sort of wrapping up the initial outreach phase, having this open house. We've had a chance to talk to some stakeholders directly in interviews and get some feedback that way. The next step is for us to look at these potential policy directions and really develop potential changes to the code. Have a work session with Planning Commission, look at transportation impacts and make sure that those are something that can be managed as we look at, say, additional uses, and then draft code changes that the Planning Commission and City Council will look at. So in terms of participating in the process, those meetings are a pretty important component of that, in addition to being here this evening. But as the policy and the code language continues to get refined, you'll see that at Planning Commission and City Council. And so that's going to be an important place to engage as we continue to go forward. We've got a project page that I've got the link here for, and then I've got Aaron's email address for folks to share written comments, ask questions, things like that. And so let's see, do you have anything in the Q&A that's come up for questions or direction? I think we have one comment in the chat.
Right, more comments about infrastructure and what the future is with coordination with our engineering division, as well as our partners. So I think those conversations are best had directly with us. I understand there's lots of moving parts and pieces, and it's probably something that we wouldn't really be able to fully address in this open house.
Sounds like there's some interest in that more flexible, smaller footprint type format, and that's been successful in Tualatin in the past. And kind of a question about craft industrial that I saw. So that's it's something that some communities have looked at. It's not a direct fit, I think, as I mentioned in the presentation, because I think where it's most commonly seen is in industrial areas that are actually starting to redevelop. And so you may see a workshop type space in older buildings where there's production of kind of smaller scale production of goods, but then there may be a retail component. Beer comes to mind as one where you have like the small brewery that may have like a tap room in there and some distribution component to move the product offsite. But at the same time, for a small parcel area like this, whether it's greenfield type development or redevelopment, it doesn't matter as much. I think there is a lot of potential, and we've seen some of those smaller, craft scale businesses go in Tualatin and other parts of the Southwest Metro.
I had a new consideration come in. I received a question about noise and what will newcomers have to do to reduce noise for their buildings. And I know, Chris, you had touched on our chapter 63, which speaks to industrial uses and how we curtail some of those nuisances like noise. So we have specific regulations against vibration and certain decibel levels. But we can certainly, I guess, consider wing walls or things that are typically used in industrial zones to provide greater buffer between maybe some of the loading bays in our residential areas.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. As we'll definitely want to look at chapter 63 and make sure as we, if we look at more uses, that those are also, the effects of those are still, covered under chapter 63, or it aligns well with what those kind of nuisance prevention measures are. Well, I'm not seeing anything coming in the chat. I don't know if we're getting any more questions. I know it's a lot of information to kind of respond to, but we wanted to kind of give both a chance to do that live for people, but also, with this slide showing works really well too, to kind of get in touch with us once you've had a chance to kind of think about it and review some of the materials.
It looks like I received, oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah, so there haven't been any changes to the zoning proposed specifically so far, but at this point, based on those kind of early findings from the market analysis and stakeholder feedback, and looking at some of those other zones, we would be looking at, the main thing would be potentially looking at additional uses and looking at how the form of those industrial buildings is regulated through setbacks and landscaping and height and things like that. And looking at, is there a way to make a compatible, more compact form, especially for those smaller properties that don't have like a campus type acreage to build on. Question kind of about the process and whether it's being driven by landowners or the city. So in this case, we're looking at implementing those plans that have been adopted. So the concept plan for the Basalt Creek area, the Southwest and Basalt Creek plan. And so the city is definitely driving those changes through that, and just through the goals of the project. Landowners are obviously going to be important in implementing the plan, or development activity is where infrastructure is going to eventually reach this area. So that's an important consideration, but consistent with the goals of all of these plans that the city is already, the city and the community have put so much time into.
Well, thanks for that great presentation, Chris.
Thank you.
I'm seeing some more things trickle in, so that's why I keep looking off the screen.
Yeah.
But it looks like maybe a challenge would be our landscape percentages too. So we got a comment about maybe reevaluating that with what is common in the regional area.
I could see that being kind of something that would be a compounding issue on some of those sites with difficult topography, or one of those transmission lines as well, to try to meet some of the landscaping requirements when some of the land isn't that landscapable.
Seems like the traffic on our chat is kind of slowed down. I
have a question here about, is the goal to combine the parcels into large development or facilitate development on the smaller parcels? I would say the way that the MP zone currently works, it is pretty hard to develop without combining those parcels into a large development. I think, the code changes would not be, it wouldn't be written in a way to preclude that from happening if property owners were able to kind of consolidate into large development. But I think part of what we're looking at is recognizing that a lot of those smaller parcels are going to stay as smaller parcels, and make sure that those can, be developed into good, productive use that doesn't require, a huge amount of space, but really looking at what's there and what makes the most sense on smaller properties. There's always the chance that, somebody can combine those, but it's not easy. Well, if we're kind of seeing a slowdown on the questions, maybe, I'll be here for questions. So, but definitely want to emphasize that we can kind of follow up with people as well, one-on-one, if that works best for people.
Again, everyone feel free to reach out to me directly. My email address is E for Aaron, and then Engman is my last name, ENGMAN @tualatin.gov. Okay, so it looks like things have kind of slowed down, so we could probably wrap it up this evening. I want to thank everyone for their time. We will publish this presentation and the comments and questions we received in our chat feature to our website. So that way you can check back and maybe see some answers that we could be a bit more intentional with after we've delved into some of the comments and questions and reflected on them a bit. And again, reach out to me. I can add you to the project list and keep you updated with the next steps. Chris or Steve, do you have anything that you want to add before we say goodnight?
Just thank you everyone to attending and sharing your questions and sharing your insight into the area.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Good night, everyone.